As the phrase, witch hunt, still shows, the witch craze of the early modern period is now an infamous byword for superstition, hysteria and irrational cruelty. So in this video, we are going to go over the top 10 things you probably never knew about witches. Number 10. The Romans. Belief in witchcraft is probably as old as fear itself. Ronald Hutton finds degrees of it in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. What is perhaps more surprising is how powerful and deadly the fear of witchcraft was in ancient Rome. Romans now seem to epitomize order, efficiency, rational pragmatism and the heights of culture. That seemingly paradoxical mixture is echoed again in early modern Europe, where the madness of witch hunts coexisted alongside the greatest achievements in art, music and literature, and the early scientific revolution sparked by Robert Boyle, Thomas Willis and Newton. Throughout history, and in much of the developing world today, the witch was prime scapegoat for bad weather, crop failure, and above all, disease. Hutton cites a Roman epidemic of 331 BC during which over 170 female citizens, two of them noblewomen, were put to death for magic. Between 184 to 180 BC. Number 9. Clairvoyance. Laura Apps and Andrew Gow estimate that, between around 1450 and 1750, roughly 110,000 people were tried as witches. The vast majority of these victims lost their lives owing to superstition and misogyny. But there is evidence that a small handful of so-called witches had genuine psychic powers. An especially significant case of this occurred in Scotland in 1591. During a spate of accusations in North Berwick from 1590 to 92, a woman called Agnes Sampson was tortured and interrogated, and finally brought before King James VI. James was initially skeptical of Sampson's occult claims, until she related to him the words of a conversation between himself and his wife Anne, on the first night of their wedding in Norway. James reportedly stated that, all the devils in hell could not have discovered the same, and now began to take Sampson more seriously. Modern examples of clairvoyance are well known among mediums. Remote viewing and clairvoyance have been used by the CIA and by the police when seeking missing persons. Sampson was garroted and burned in Edinburgh on 28 January 1591. Number 8. The Witch of Edmonton. On 14 April 1621, Elizabeth Sawyer of Edmonton was charged with various crimes performed by supposed witchcraft. On 19 April she was hanged as a witch at Tyburn. One especially damning piece of evidence against Sawyer was the death of a neighbor, Agnes Ratcliffe, after an argument between the two women. Ratcliffe's husband testified to an alleged curse on his wife, who had then gone to bed, foaming at the mouth in terror, and dying within 4 days. The case is now famous because of the play based on it, rushed opportunistically onto the stage by Thomas Dekker, William Rowley and John Ford that same December. Whilst this adaptation may have been partly inspired by the success of Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, The Witch of Edmonton was very different. Number 7. Witch cannibals. Like some kind of imaginative black hole, witches sucked in just about every conceivable taboo and gave it new life. Time and again, witches were accused of cannibalism, especially the eating of babies or children. In some cases they were said to rob graves, and powder bones for their magic, but they were often seen as lusting for flesh as food. Lyndall Roper records the 1590 confession of one Barbara Learheimer of Nordlingen, who had supposedly eaten a roasted child's little foot. The fact that Learheimer died as a result of torture would give most of us some prejudice against her accusers. Yet, between 1590 and 1598, it was believed that Learheimer and a number of other respectable citizens were secretly eating children. Number 6. Sucking out your life. If there is one single belief about witches which broadly covers all their supposed crimes, it is this: witches attacked life. They were often the scapegoats for miscarriages, infertility, and cot deaths. They were also scapegoated for severe weather which threatened the life and fertility of crops, and no less frequently for any illness of livestock. These beliefs distilled themselves into a recurrent fantasy that witches somehow sucked the life from food, crops, animals and people. At the time of Shakespeare, the soul was a real biological force, and fat had a status as an essence of life which rivaled blood. Whilst we do hear of witches drinking blood, the accusations made in Samlesbury, Lancashire, in summer 1612, are probably more typical of imagined witch assaults. Two sisters, Ellen and Janet Beerley, were alleged to have killed an infant by occult means, later removing from its grave to roast, boil and eat parts of it. Number 5. Male witches. About 80% of those accused and killed for witchcraft were women. But for some reason, Normandy boasted an unusually high number of male witch cases from 1564 to 1660. As William Monter has shown, of 380 witchcraft defendants in this region, around three-quarters were male, whilst after 1630, men virtually monopolized Norman witchcraft cases. Back in Britain, the notorious witch country of Essex featured two extraordinary male witches, with very different characters and fates, across the last decades of Victoria and the reign of Edward VII. In 1864, Emma Smith and Samuel Stammers of Sybil Hedingham were sentenced to 6 months hard labor for beating and ducking in the river an elderly deaf-mute Frenchman, known locally as Dummy. After going to bed in wet clothes, Dummy contracted bronchitis, and presently died. The assailants evidently believed that Dummy, known as a fortune-teller, had bewitched them. Sadly, his being French and a deaf-mute would also have fed into this paranoia. Meanwhile, in Canadon in Essex, a man named George Pickingale, or Pickingle, died in 1909, aged 93, having enjoyed a long and terrifying life as a reputed male witch. Number 4. Cutting a witch. Spontaneous vigilante assaults on supposed witches, sometimes fatal, may have been motivated by terror, hysteria or personal feuding in many cases. But the widespread and enduring habit of cutting a witch was based on the magical idea that this particular assault would cancel the witch's power. In Scotland, this tactic was known as cutting a witch above the breath, i.e., on the forehead. Lisanne Henderson tells of the Reverend Peter Ray of Kirkbride, a former law student of Glasgow University, doing this in 1706 to a woman believed to have bewitched him into sickness. One night in 1826, a Mr. Mony Laws, the minister of Kirkpatrick Fleming in Dumfries, was called out urgently to a riverside cottage. After a miller's pigs had drowned in the river, he had decided on his uncanny female neighbor as the culprit, and so had slit the skin of her forehead across, and let it hang down over her eyes. Mr. Mony Laws and his son sewed it up for her. In Market Rosin, Lincolnshire in 1842, a brickmaker named Radley became obsessed with a supposed witch, whom he believed to be the cause of his long-term health problems. Meeting her in the street one day, he cut her arm so that it bled profusely. The lady in question was Radley's mother. Number 3. Child witches. What could possibly be cuter than small children dressed up as witches on Halloween? In fact, this modern custom would bewilder and horrify many parents from the 15th to the 19th centuries. Usually, children were especially likely to be the victims of witchcraft. But occasionally, they were identified as witches themselves. Over 40 children were executed as witches in Würzburg in the 1620s. In 1669, a whirlwind of terror exploded through the Swedish village of Mora, where the minister suffered sleep paralysis nightmares, and lost the power of speech for several weeks. Related interrogations revealed up to 300 children who were claimed to have been attending witches' Sabbaths. That August, 14 women and 1 man were beheaded and then burned. 15 children were executed, and 148 whipped. In German Augsburg in 1723, children were again alleged to be attending witches' Sabbaths, and putting teeth and diabolic powder in their parents' beds. Lyndall Roper records that around 20 children aged 6 to 16 were held in prison cells for a year. Number 2. The Witch Dynasty of Dettingen. Many witch hunters believed that such devilish magic was passed down. In Dettingen, southern Germany, the Gamperl family were known as witches and serial killers on an epic scale. Husband and wife Paul and Anne formed a coven with their sons Simon and Jacob, along with tailor George Smalties, and armorer, Ulrich Seeheltebaum. When a storm broke on 23 July 1600, a dog fled into a cave and disturbed the Satanic Six at their black rites. Ensuing confessions before the governor of Munich were memorable indeed. Paul claimed to have been trained in the family business by his grandmother, and to have murdered 100 children, 2 of his uncles, and 16 neighbors. Anne tallied 100 children and 19 old people, also having hexed into suicide an innkeeper's wife, who ran into an oven, and her husband, who stuck his head in a swilling tub and drowned. The sons had jointly killed over 100. Adding in the totals claimed by Smalties and Seeheltebaum, we have 527 murders by the coven, a figure rivaling the reports of the Hungarian Countess Elizabeth Báthory around the same time. Number 1. Witches and Poltergeists. A few years ago I had the very strange experience of studying poltergeists and finding, in conversation with various friends, that these angry or disruptive spirits had invaded the houses of my fellow academics. Poltergeists, I realized to my consternation, do actually exist. And further research showed that they were the cause of witch accusations in a small number of cases. Poltergeists seem to use the energy of a young person in a given household, and that person is often female. Given that bizarre events follow this person around, observers can leap to accusations of witchcraft. In Cork in Ireland in 1661, Florence Newton was charged with witchcraft after an argument with one Mary Longden had caused Longden to suffer fits. The stones fell from nowhere around Longden were classic poltergeist stuff. Missing records now leave us unsure of Newton's sentence, but formal witch charges were extremely rare in Ireland. With that being said, here we come to the end of our video. I hope you like this video. If so, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so you never miss any video. See you in the next video. Till then, take care. Thanks for watching.